had intimations from Councillor Dowling and Councillor Montgomery that they were declaring an interest in an item that was included in the motion. So they may now wish to leave. And can I just ask if we have any other declarations of interest now that you've had time to consider the submissions from the respective parties?
Provost, can I come in there?
Sure.
It's just that Councillor
John McIntyre.
The administration proposal has additional funding for private landlord enforcement. So just to declare that I'm a landlord, but because it's not a policy change, I'll be taking part in the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McIntyre.
Provost, ditto for myself, Councillor McLaren.
Councillor McLaren, same reasons as Councillor McIntyre.
Correct.
Councillor Mackay.
Yes, I must declare an interest because I'm a council taxpayer and council tax banding falls into this discussion.
Okay, sure that applies to all of us. Thank you very much. So do we have any further amendments to the two that's already, sorry, to the one that's already been submitted? I'm taking that as a no. Therefore, I need to ask Councillor Shaw if he's willing to accept the amendment from the Labour group.
No.
Okay, does anyone else wish to contribute to the debate before we go to the vote on the budget? Councillor Andy Doig.
Thanks, Provost. I think there's positives in both these budgets, both the amendment, the Labour amendment, and SNP's budget. And I think over the piece, though, I mean, I think especially like the Labour proposals to put more funding into the Scottish Welfare Fund. As somebody who works in the addiction support field, the mishandled attempts, I think, in the last decade by the Tories to deal with the reviewing the welfare system as a whole has been pretty much an unmitigated disaster. It's been a disaster in a great number of ways. So I do have sympathy. I think that's a strong element to the Labour amendment that's before us, Provost. But I am concerned there doesn't seem to be any village investment in the Labour amendment, nor does there seem to be, unless I've misread it, I've missed it, there doesn't seem to be any investment for schools. I do feel on the whole that the SNP motion is the stronger of the two. I like the fact that there's investment in Clyde-Muirshire Regional Park because that's one of the top visitor attractions in Renfrewshire. And I think for villages like mine, in Lochwinnoch, for example, if areas like that are to recover from COVID, we need to have a strong offer as far as tourism is concerned. And I think Clyde-Muirshire has always been undersold by the council. So I'm glad to see that investment. I'm glad to see the investment of 100 million to tackle poverty and low income. I think that's essential. I'm especially pleased to see that because I was disappointed in elements of the SNP's Holyrood budget. I was pleased to see that Kate Forbes wanted, she's put in a record investment of 16 billion into the Scottish NHS, but then a massive cut of 268 million to the social housing budget, which I think was a very retrograde decision. And in fact, that's a decision that's been criticised by the Labour SNP coalition that runs East Renfrewshire Council. I'm pleased to say there's key elements in this budget, Provost, which will be of benefit to directly to my constituents. I had a series of meetings with the council leader and the deputy. I especially welcome the Gateway Village investment proposals because I think there's been a real issue in villages like Howwood and Kilbarchan, to a lesser extent in Lochwinnoch, but certainly in Kilbarchan there has been a number of road traffic accidents in the last 6 months. We need to do a lot more to tackle speeding in villages and make it safer for residents. This is becoming a real key issue, and I'm glad that there's funding in here for a pilot, and I know that Kilbarchan will be one of the first to be examined for options. I'm pleased too to look at things like the school infrastructure programme as well. There has been key investment that I've asked for in St Margaret's Playground in Johnson, in Lochwinnoch Primary Playground. There's investigations also to take place about the drainage situation in Howwood Primary. These are very welcome issues indeed, Provost. An investment that I think is very necessary for my ward, and I think on that basis I would support the administration budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doig. Councillor McCartan.
Thank you, Provost. Can I first say I appreciate how difficult it must be for the Director and the administration to try to put forward a budget at this time. Given the lack of certainty from both Westminster and Holyrood, I'd like to thank Alan Russell and his team for the work that they have done in putting the budget detail together. I find the whole focus that the Scottish Government has given to freezing the council tax to be absolutely abhorrent. The 3% supposedly being given to local authorities is no doubt part of the budget that the SNP government has already held back from us, and then giving it to us like Lady Bountiful to bribe the council into not putting up the council tax. We even have a certainty that the 3% is going to be baselined, or if it is a one-off bribe which will leave the council in even more trouble next year. I can only hope, as next year will also be an important election year for the SNP at local level, another bribe will be forthcoming then too. It's just another example of the SNP's centralisation of power, not giving local government the respect that it should in managing its own affairs. The 3% is, of course, less than the council might have raised council taxes by, and therefore leads to a reduction in potential income and resultant cuts in services. Now more than ever, we need to ensure that good local services are provided for those who need them, and this is a shocking and indeed sleek way of the SNP trying to portray this 3% gift as something special when it's not. As far as the budget demands are concerned, I've already had discussions with the administration, which the administration needed to include in its budget, and I'm reasonably confident that given their constraints, that has been acknowledged. In particular, more money for mental health services over and above that, which was agreed via the Addiction Services Report last month. Particular focus for mental health provisions in schools, with an increase in professional support on a year-by-year basis as finance and availability of trained professionals allows. Increasing in funding for climate change projects. The coming year's expenditure is largely to do with the developmental and investigative work, which is very necessary, but we must look to what funding is made available for work stemming from those investigations. And lastly, in that direction, the maintenance of roads. While the capital budget is still set at 40 million over 4 years, much more is required to fund the ongoing maintenance of roads. They are truly dreadful and they're getting worse. Only last night at the Bredland and Foxbar Community Council, this very plea was made, and I'm sure Councillor Burns will attest to that. The roads and footways in our area are in a shocking state and need to be improved quickly. Looking at the motion and the amendments before us with the SNP budget, I mean, just highlighting some of the things which I think are good in the investment in the green space surroundings, ensuring funding for the COVID renewal, tackling poverty programme, increased investment in mental health services, particularly targeted at children, and support for the Citizens Advice Bureau, who will undoubtedly be inundated over the next year with even more requests for help, and additional support for young carers. I am particularly anxious about the support that carers are getting or not getting over this period of time. And just I think as Andy Doig said, the Labour amendment echoes many of the aims of the administration budget, just perhaps slightly changing the balance of investments, but generally acceptable. I think in practice, and particularly due to COVID and the uncertainties of budget planning from Westminster and Holyrood, both the motion and the amendment before us do today, they are both worthy of consideration. But I think on balance, the SNP motion has slightly more of the focus that I would like to see in the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCartan. I'd like to now bring in Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Provost. Morning, everyone. I just have a few comments to make. 3 specific items of the SNP budget I'd like to comment on. Firstly, the £100,000 assigned to offset licensing fees from last year. Everyone in this room will know that the trade has been devastated over the last year. It's important that Renfrewshire Council's licensing board shows it understands that, and it's going to do everything it can to support the recovery, which I'm sure we all very much hope will be this year. I certainly intend to do my bit. I am looking forward very much to having a pint of Guinness in a pub again. If it's convening a licensing, I have to go around many pubs in Renfrewshire to see how they're getting on. I'm willing to step up and do so. Convening on this point, can I pay tribute to Margaret Diamond and Colette Cardozi and the Renfrewshire Licensing Forum and Natalie McShane of Paisley First, who have ensured that this subject is kept front and centre over the last few months. Excuse me. An absolute credit to themselves in the society, and I wanted to get on record my thanks to them. Can I also warmly welcome the additional 200,000 for additional staff to help with issues between landlords and tenants. This is an issue that comes up all too frequently, as those of us who sit in the Regulatory Functions Board will know. So I'm delighted to see money being invested, which will help beef up statutory coverage of this particular issue. And finally, another matter covered by the Regulatory Functions is something which might not leap out of the budget papers, which I'm really pleased to see included, and that's £50,000 to help retailers move away from single-use plastic and towards using biodegradable packaging instead. Getting that shift started is really only the beginning, but it's an example of the small but very important steps which local authorities can be taking to combat the environmental issues which we're all aware of. It's really good to see. I think these are all good steps to see. I very much welcome and I'll be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I move on to our next speaker, as you know, I was disconnected just before the recess. I just want to make sure with one of the officers that we had a seconder for Councillor Hart's amendment. And was that recorded?
That was myself.
Yes. Okay, that is great. Thank you, Councillor Sharkey.
And I reserve the right to speak if that's okay with you as well.
Yeah, I've got you on the list anyway.
But I'm just making the point, usually when you reserve, you're the last to be called. So I'm in your hands, but I'd be pleased for the usual procedure to happen.
Okay, Councillor Lisa Marie Hughes.
Thank you, Provost. There are 2 items in the budget I particularly want to speak to, but I want to put on record that I think our budget is a budget with wellbeing and recovery at heart, that looks at it holistically rather than targets very specific things, but also looks at it holistically. So I'm going to speak to 2 things that sort of fall within my remit as our cultural spokesperson and as chair of Renfrewshire Leisure, because as you'll be aware, I oversee both our culture and our leisure strategy. So the first one I want to touch on is the £0.2 million for Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, as well as loving Dolly Parton for the talented woman that she is. She's a wonderful philanthropist who delivers excellent initiatives right across the world, and the Imagination Library delivers books to children monthly. Now, as a bookish child has turned into, very evidently, I think, a bookish woman from a working class background who did not have a lot of money at all as a child, I think this is something that can be truly life-changing for children. Things like literacy and musicality built into literature changes who people are, makes them creative, and is a space for positive well-being and respite for children, often ones who have very troubling lives, and I think it's a smashing thing, and I'm delighted that we've done it. And the other thing I want to touch on is the 1.1 million to support outdoor access and play areas. One of the biggest issues we will have with well-being and health coming out of COVID is that people who are already active will go back to gyms. They will return to the activities they do. People who have continued sports throughout their life will return to that. But we will have other people in society who already have health issues, who have perhaps not been quite so active and will really be looking to change how their lives are. And what I love about this is there's a real focus on providing free access to activities that aren't deemed to be things like sports, which can be quite daunting for people. People can get outside, children can play, families can be part of that without it being something that feels challenging and like a barrier to them. So I'm delighted that we have this in our budget, and I want to commend the budget to the rest of my colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Okay, Councillor Devine.
Thanks, Thanks, Provost. Could I just say it's come as absolutely no surprise that Councillor Doig and Councillor McCartan are supporting the SNP. They're quite happy to see, as the figures behind me, is £936 million cut from council budgets in the last 10 and a bit years. They're quite happy to do that. They're really nothing more than Renfrewshire's Patrick Harvey. That's all they are. They're quite happy to sit back and pass these cuts on to the people of Renfrewshire, and that's all they've done for years. So I'll leave that one there. I think there's quite a few other people want to come in.
Which cuts, Eddie? Which ones have we passed on?
Councillor Sharkey.
Sorry, thank you, Provost. My machine seems to be jumping me in and out here, but I hope that everyone can hear me. Oh, grand, right. Actually, what I most wanted to come in to reply to the seconder, right, of the SNP's motion, because Councillor Nicholson talked about needing to get back to the steady state, to normality, to a normal way of working, as I think was the actual words he used. And I think that it's a misunderstanding, right, of this whole process, right, to think that there is ever going to be a return to the normality, right. And also, I think that's part of the difficulty that today's budget labours under, because you're trying to act as if it was one of the previous budgets where we just do a wee bit of accounting, do a sum, right, and hopefully come out with answers that people can go forward with into to the elections that have been mentioned by a couple of people, I think, while we weren't recording. But I mean, I'm happy for that to come forward now. Yes, there is an important part for this budget. Yes, it's an important part in the elections. But people who don't understand that COVID has been a watershed moment in the history of this country, right, are not, I think, qualified, therefore, to stand in those elections, or indeed, make any reasonable comment on them. The purpose of our budget today, right, should be looking to that future and saying, how do we actually deal with the world after COVID? And I'm afraid all too, well, certainly I do not support, right, the SNP motion. I'm seconding Labour's amendment, in this. But one of the things, so I've just been heckled there. Right? One of the things that we're going to need, to do is address what I've called in the past the tsunami, right, of mental health issues that are coming up here. And I think quite clearly in the two amendments you get a notion of that. But the point I was going to make just before the heckle was that up until this point, we've always been able, right, to say, and I think Councillor McCartan actually was hinting at it, but didn't get quite close enough to it, that there's not really that much difference that can be exercised in a council budget. Right? So the nuances, sorry, somebody's, again, as I said, heckle being put nuance into my words there. But so you'll have to apologise. I need to change the screen for that. Right, sorry, that'll do.
Councillor Sharkey, can you please carry on?
Right, thank you. It's just, no, it was entirely my fault. I left the chat up, so I was allowing myself to be heckled, and I apologise.
I don't hear anyone heckling you.
It's what happens on the chat, right? And it's entirely my fault, and I apologise to you about that. So to get back to the point, there is not much difference between the two amendments, or sort of the two proposals that are before us. But that comes back to the basic issue of politics that I was alluding to at the start, right? And Councillor Doig was quite right when he, risking the sort of criticism that Councillor Hart got last year, when he did make the importance of the Scottish Parliament and how the Scottish budget is passed along to us. And I think, a criticism coming from Andy Doig of that nature, I think something that the SNP, needs to listen to. And it's because we have no real control over our budget that we get into these particular issues. Councillor McCartan also raised the issue of the council tax, right, which is a fundamental problem that we have with our budget. Frozen council tax means that the council can't respond in the way that I hope that she was suggesting that she would use it for. But the problem here, and I'm going to remind the SNP that it was their great election stroke was to promise the scrapping of the council tax decade or over a decade ago, and they've never quite managed to achieve that. So we're saddled with a situation where we're almost on a fixed income, right? That if we risk doing anything about it, we have to unfreeze the council tax, right? And if I can just push that analogy just a bit further, unfreezing the council tax, right, will just point out to us how much it is actually dead as a tax, right? It's important that we be looking to the future, to how local government actually is financed in the future, right, post-COVID, right? And I don't think taxing it in the way that it's been taxed up till now, right, is going to be a sensible way of doing it. Certainly having the money, presented to us in the way that the Scottish Government has been presenting to us, and let's be honest about this. That was an issue that happened under Labour when the Labour Liberal Democrats were in charge of the Scottish Parliament as well. Local government was hamstrung by this particular way of working. So if we want to have a real meaningful budget exercise, we're going to have to think about that in the future. However, today's budget is what we have to deal with. And let's have a look at what the differences are. Right, Labour's very much been concerned about the policies that we've been talking about for ages, which are about the concerns for people. And although I very much welcome the SNP's suggestion, right, and certainly we want to put more into that, but this suggestion of money for counselling at schools, I think I'm on record, long and weary about, it's all very well to set aside a sum of money and say, look how much we've spent or intend to spend, right? But if you then do not use that money in a way that's efficient and effective, and as I said, my concerns about the counselling services to school are a long recorded, but we really need to make sure that when we put this money up that we are you're dealing with those services properly, and I hope that that's something that will be listened to, right, for that. And finally, I can't let Councillor Steele's remarks go. His personal drinking habits are a matter for him, right, and I'll certainly not take a moral opinion about them. But the actual thing that he was speaking to was saying that it was a good thing to give money to pay for a licence, which would come back to the council. We charge the particular fee. So he's suggesting that it's a good thing that that Peter pays Paul, and I don't really accept that. It's also conjoined with some hot money put aside for changing the receptacles, right, at a hot food stall. Now, as I said, I'm as big a fan of a pie in a pint as anybody else. But when we're talking about priorities, right, if you're going to spend £150,000, right, on facilitating pies and pints, I think the public is entitled to ask you the question, well, could you not spend that money so that less people die during COVID? Right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sharkey. I'd like to now bring in Councillor McEwen.
Thanks, Provost. I am absolutely delighted to see the investment and funding for walking, cycling and safer streets. And that's to support the use of green space and being outdoors. As we remain and recover from the pandemic, that is so important. And this would also include funding to support traffic calming measures in villages and rural areas, another important issue that we've addressed. Investment in our play parks, £1,500,000 investment, wonderful. Investment in school crossing points, investment in country parks, and that includes Gleniffer Braes, as said, and Clyde Moorshall. Absolutely delighted with this, long overdue, especially with Gleniffer Braes. So much investment, Provost, in healthy living, which helps our mental health as well. I am absolutely delighted with this, and I have no hesitation whatsoever in commending this budget. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor McEwen. Councillor Sheridan, did you want to come in?
Yes, please, Provost. That's why I put my hand up. Could I just concur, first of all, with the comments made by Councillor Devine, Councillors McCartan and Doig. But I also like to put on record, Provost, my support, and I think the Labour Group support for the budget is brought forward by the Budget Support Group and the Labour Group. And in particular, I'd like to pay credit to Councillor Jim Hart, who is our main spokesperson on finance. He brought forward this, what I would regard as a responsible budget, under a very tight timescale, with very limited resources, and it was only his endeavour in terms of asking the right questions that we got the answers eventually that we were looking for. So it's been a progressive response, but as I say, he's brought this forward and he's worked extremely hard in very, very limited timescale in terms of information and in terms of very limited resources. So I would just like to put on record our thanks to him and his group.
Thank you, Councillor Sheridan. Councillor McGurk. Councillor McGurk, you're on mute. Councillor McGurk, can you hear me? You're on mute.
Okay.
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Councillor McGurk.
Right, okay, thanks very much for that. Sorry about that, folks. The computer seems to be a wee bit slow at this end this morning. Right, good morning, everyone. I commend the administration's motion and budget today. This is a budget that goes across all spectrums of the council. So every single avenue, every single nook and cranny will be impacted by this budget, and that is so important that we do that. Councillor McEwen raised all the major issues for me to do with traffic calming and road safety for a lot of our people and the green spaces. It's so important that we do that. But mental health is also important. And I think this budget actually allows for us to invest in that by making our spaces more ready for people to get out and enjoy. And that's the important thing. That's the one thing that we learned through COVID, that people did start to go out a bit more than they've ever done before. They may go back to the gyms, but I still think they'll come out to the outside. The additional monies for some of the other investments are really quite crucial to make the services function and to actually improve them. And our budget actually encourages that. And I wish and I hope you all support this budget. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor McGurk. Jacqueline Cameron next. Councillor Cameron.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, I'm not sure what version of the administration budget that the Labour group are reading, because I think it's a hugely positive budget, and I think given the constraints and the financial hit that the council's taken because of COVID, it's nothing short of a miracle. It's a fantastic budget. We all know that COVID has, I'm laughing, Eddie's shaking his head, he's put me off. We all know that COVID's absolutely heightened health inequalities, and I think there's lots in this budget that addresses those health inequalities. And I think as well, to be clear, that the 2.323 million that's going to the HSCP, the detail's not there, but if you look at the IJB papers, you can see that there's lots to address issues around mental health, and of course the money from the Alcohol and Drug Commission going to the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership. A lot to support people going forward, including carers and everyone who's been affected by the pandemic. So I think it's a fantastic budget and absolutely support it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cameron. Councillor Patterson, Jim Patterson.
Many thanks, Convener. And if you'll indulge me, I won't be able to put my camera on because my internet connection is rather poor, and I didn't want to run the risk of being ejected like yourself earlier. So I've left the camera off just now, which I'm sure is much to the delight of many of the members present. But just to be clear, and it'll be of no surprise that I'm delighted to welcome the SNP budget today. It's another budget which in difficult times addresses areas which are of the most importance to the residents of Renfrewshire. Now, some areas I'd like to highlight in particular are the funding to enable the Communities that Care project to continue. Now, that's fantastic work that Who Cares Scotland does in engaging and empowering our care experienced young people in Renfrewshire, and also raising and educating the community about care experienced young people. This money is great value for money, in my opinion, because by empowering the care experienced young people, they then come to me and the senior officers with suggestions on how we can do things different in Renfrewshire. Their voice is being heard, and to continue that for a minimum of 3 years with this funding, it's got to be viewed as a positive. Councillor Andy Doig touched on earlier the increased investment in school infrastructure projects. So although the pandemic's delayed much of the works that the last budget funded, those will begin to move forward at pace as we return to normality. So the additional funding that hopefully will be agreed today will allow for even more work to be completed, with a particular focus on the condition of our playgrounds and school toilet facilities. And that has to be welcomed as well, because even small improvements to our school estate can have profound benefits for the pupils and the staff. The additional funding to Renfrewshire Citizens Advice Bureau to enable them to continue supporting those who require independent welfare, housing, money and employment advice is absolutely vital. As we begin to understand the impact of COVID and the necessary restrictions, it's more important than ever that these services are available to as many Renfrewshire residents as possible. Councillor Hughes mentioned a project earlier, a project which I'm extremely proud to see us fund, which is the Imagination Library project. This will allow the work that we're already undertaking with our care experienced young people to expand it to all children in Renfrewshire as they reach their second birthday. The studies have shown the positive impact of this project has in closing the attainment gap in all measures for children under 5, and it's a commitment I'm delighted to be making on World Book Day. It seems very apt on that grounds. Also welcome the funding to increase support for young carers to allow them to arrange and access respite with their peers, particularly at this time. A lot of our young carers will have had an extremely tough 12 months, kind of highlighted by Councillor McCartan in her submission. And to touch on one of the most important aspects in an area that we're in agreement on between, obviously, both the motion and the amendment, both has mention of investment in mental health support for pupils. We have a £250,000 investment this year, and Labour has a £750,000 investment over 3 years. So I suppose you could look at it as it's the same investment this year, and we'll look at forward how we continue to fund that going forward. But the pandemic and the required lockdowns have been felt by everyone, but particularly school pupils who have had their education and their lives disrupted at a critical stage. The Council agreed at the end of last year that we feel CAMS is not meeting the needs of the many children in Renfrewshire, and this investment won't entirely address that, so I can't kid on that it will. But along with last year's commitment as part of the Alcohol and Drug Commission and the confirmed Scottish Government funding we know is coming, will allow us to begin work in supporting our young people and improving their mental health. Now, this is the fourth budget that the SNP administration has put forward to the council. And again, it is one where we have incorporated suggestions from opposition councillors. I won't hide the fact that we negotiate with opposition councillors. It is another demonstration that if you engage positively with this administration, common ground can be found, and it can lead to investment in priorities of all members. So rather than criticise members for engaging with administration so they can see their priorities included in the budget, I think it's something that can be commended, and it works in the reality that we are a minority administration and that we are there to be negotiated with when it comes to budgets. That's always been the case and will continue to be the case. It is, however, unfortunate that not all opposition members engage positively and have received no investment for their priorities, despite there being some common areas in both the motion and amendment. If the last 4 years are anything to go by, though, this won't, however, stop them posing for photos next to newly resurfaced roads, which are part of a record roads investment programme under this SNP administration. It won't stop them advising their constituents to access the play park and village investment funds, which they voted against. It won't stop candidates in the forthcoming Holyrood election from trying to associate themselves with infrastructure projects that their party colleagues have argued against funding. It won't even stop the sheer brass neck of councillors who take to social media to claim they will do all they can to save a nursery and then vote against the very funding which means that that nursery is still here today. It is opposition for opposition's sake, pure and simple. When so much more could be achieved by engaging with us, they choose instead to turn their heads and hiss SNP bad. How much longer will it take for them to realise that this just doesn't wash with the public anymore? They see through the petty form of politics that is reflected in opinion polls and election results time and time again. It's not too late to change trajectory and vote for this budget, which in these difficult times provides certainty and investment. But as I said, this is our fourth budget, our penultimate budget prior to the council elections of 2022. I issue a challenge to the opposition members that have so far chosen not to engage with us. Don't sit in the sidelines and carp for another 12 months. Help shape the final budget. You had a whole year to get round the table and secure something for the communities you are elected to represent. The door is open. The invitation is a matter of public record. The only thing that's stopping it happening is you. Thank you, Provost.
Thanks, Councillor Patterson. I'm going to now bring in Councillor John Shaw to sum up. Councillor Shaw.
Thanks, Provost. Councillor Patterson just stole my speech. I'm a bit angry about that. I think Councillor Hart mentioned at the start of his speech that the leader had attacked him at the last budget. It wasn't the leader, Councillor Hart, it was myself, and I'd done it the year before as well, because you do it every year. You bring back the same speech every year. There's no attempt at engagement, as Jim said. There's nothing at all. It's opposition for opposition's sake, SNP bad. The very fact, I mean, there are similarities in some of the stuff in the budgets, but the very fact your budget is broadly similar to the budget that you brought the last 3 years tells me that no thought is going into this, tells me that, you know, we're in, you know, unprecedented times. We've got a pandemic underway. That you're not thinking about that. You're just thinking about, you know, this is what we've done last year. This is what we've done the year before. We're just going to do it again. You know, the special measures needed for the special times we're in just now. You know, some of your funding, sending it out over the 3 years, that funding needs to be spent now. We need to be focusing our investment now to ensure that we get, you know, the best results we can. For Councillor Sharkey to also have a go at some of the business funding that we've put in there. I know that the Labour budget has no business funding at all, not a penny that I can see. So it'll be interesting to see if our Conservative friends vote for that one or vote for the budget that's actually got some business investment in there. So I'll leave it at that, Provost. It's same old, same old. I'm probably being same old now as well, because I give the same speech every year, but we'll leave it at that and see how it goes. Thanks, Provost.
Provost, it's Councillor Andy Doig here. I demand the right to reply to some of the comments made by Councillor Devine and Councillor Sheridan, please.
Councillor Doig, I was not notified of you that you wanted to speak before I asked Councillor Shaw to sum up. I apologise for that.
A hand up for quite some time.
Councillor, and there are a couple of other councillors wanted to had their hand up, but they have already contributed to the debate, and that is why I went to the summing up. I apologise for that, Councillor, but your hand just simply didn't go up in time. Can we go to the vote, please?
Thank you, Provost. It's a roll call vote. Will members please indicate if they're voting for the motion moved by Councillor Shaw and seconded by Councillor Nicholson, or the amendment, which was moved by Councillor Hart and seconded by Councillor Sharp. Councillor Adam McGregor.
Motion.
Councillor Begg.
Amendment.
Councillor Bibby.
Amendment.
Councillor Binks.
Amendment.
Councillor Brown.
Amendment.
Councillor Burns.
Motion.
Councillor Jacqueline Cameron.
Motion.
Provost Cameron.
Motion.
Councillor Campbell.
Motion.
Councillor Davidson.
Amendment.
Councillor Devine. Councillor Devine.
Amendment. Sorry.
Councillor Andy Doig.
Motion.
Councillor Audrey Doig.
Motion.
Councillor Don.
Motion.
Councillor Grady.
Amendment.
Councillor Graham.
Amendment.
Councillor Hart.
Amendment.
Councillor Hood.
Amendment.
Councillor Hughes.
Motion.
Councillor Kennedy.
Amendment.
Councillor Kerr.
Amendment.
Councillor Mack. Councillor Mackay.
Amendment.
Councillor James McLaren.
Amendment.
Councillor Kenny McLaren.
Motion.
Councillor Max McLaren.
Motion.
Councillor McCartan.
Motion.
Councillor McCulloch.
Amendment.
Councillor McEwen.
Motion.
Councillor McGurk. Councillor McGurk.
Sorry, motion.
Councillor McIntyre.
Amendment.
Councillor McNaughton.
Motion.
Councillor Mylett.
Motion.
Councillor Nicholson.
Motion.
Councillor Patterson.
For the motion.
Councillor Rodden.
Motion.
Councillor Sharkey. Councillor Sharkey.
Amendment.
Councillor Shaw.
Motion.
Councillor Sheridan.
Amendment.
Councillor Steele.
Motion.
And Councillor Strang.
Amendment.
I have 21 for the motion and 19 for the amendment. The
Can I
motion
just-
is carried.
Councillor Sharkey, you're sharing your screen with the entire meeting. I don't know if you're aware.
No, I wasn't aware. Right. As I said, I've been having some bother with the screen today. My apologies to everybody about that.
What's on it, Jim? Tell me.
It wasn't very nuanced.
Better together.
Okay, can we have the result of the vote, please?
It was 21 for the motion, 19 for the amendment, Provost, so the motion is carried.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's my intention to now have a 10-minute break so you can go and stretch your legs and get yourself a hot drink or something. And we'll do that now, and that'll allow other members to rejoin the meeting too. Okay, so I'll see you all in 10 minutes. Councillor Sharkey, maybe you can get some help with the screen.
Sorry, is it still?
It's still there, Councillor, so yeah,
well,
I'll get a member of IT.
Help with it then.
I'll get a member of IT to call you, okay?
Thank you very much. Councillor Duncan.
Hi, Councillor Sharkey. In the top right-hand side of the screen, you should have a little, next to where it says leave, you should have a little square with a cross in it, I think.
Kathy,
Uh-huh.
could you say something? All right, just so I can hear these work.
Yeah. Hi, hello, Marie. Can you hear me?
Yes, can.
Uh-huh.
Can I say to all members, we didn't pause the recording, so the meeting is still being recorded at the moment.
Okay.
You are going to pause it so that we can be rude to each other, aren't we?
Don't let that stop you, Tom. Why then?
Have all councillors returned?
I'm just trying to have a look, Provost.
Okay, I believe we're just waiting for Councillor Binks and Councillor Devine. Councillor Devine is here. Does anyone know if Councillor Binks is coming back or if he's having trouble connecting? We're also missing Councillor McCulloch. I'll give them another minute and then I have to move on, I'm afraid.
Councillor Binks appears to be with us now.
Okay, good.
Provost, could I just take this opportunity to remind colleagues that it's a lovely sunny day out there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, you wire in and tell them that, Jim. I'm happy.
Jim, is that a hint for us to get on with this as quick as we can? Is that?
Absolutely. I've got gardening to do.
It's not sunny in Glenburn. It's rather cold up here.
Not sunny in Renfrew either.
It's cold here and cloudy. Okay, I think we have all of the councillors back in. I'm going to make a request. Some councillors have political statements as their background today, and I would like to request that they remove them, please. I'm happy to bring in Ken to refer you to the legal position of the council. If you want to question my request.
I think there's a precedent being set for this, Provost, is there not?
Well, bring him in then, Provost.
I will do, yeah. I'll bring Ken in.
Thank you, Provost. I'd just like to remind members of the terms of Section 2 of the Local Government Act in 1986. What that says, Section 2.1, says a local authority shall not publish or arrange for the publication of any material which, in whole or in part, appears to be designed to affect public support for a political party. The issue, I appreciate this meeting isn't being broadcast live, but you'll appreciate that the council publishes the recordings of these meetings on its website. Therefore, there is a risk that if the political statements that are visible are also visible on the recording when they're published, there's a risk that the council could be seen as being in breach of Section 2 of the Local Government Act 1986.
Okay, so once again, I'm going to ask if you very kindly just remove them.
Sorry, I'd like to know from the council lawyers why then you allowed vote SNP several months ago.
It's not just the SNP in the past that's had political things up, Eddie. Your party always has. Your party has too.
Yes,
I want to draw a line in the sand today, and I want you to take Ken's advice. I'm asking you to take Ken's advice. It's up to you if you do or you don't.
I'm simply saying, Provost, that you said to one of your own councillors that you had no problem with the background that he had up, and now Ken has now come on here and said that you have a problem with the background that we have up. I'd like Ken, as a lawyer, to explain to me the difference from then and now.
I don't think I said it was not a problem.
What we've got behind us, or some of us have got behind us, is an actual fact. It's not a political statement, it's a fact.
Listen, Eddie, I'm not going to enter into an argument with you. I have asked Ken to give you his legal advice on the position. It's up to you whether you take that or not. But just remember that everyone can play the same game.
Yes.
I've asked you, you've not taken it down. I'm moving on now, okay?
That's fine.
Where was the legal advice?
I'm moving on. I am moving on to the
It doesn't say Labour anywhere.
I'm moving on to item 3 in the agenda, which is the non-housing capital investment programme, prudential framework and treasury management strategy, and capital strategy 2021 to 22 to 2025 to 26. Councillor John Shaw.
Formally. Formally. Do you hear me?
Sorry, is that you, Councillor Shaw?
Yep, I'm just moving it formally. There's
okay. And your seconder?
Myself, Provost, I formally move and reserve the right to speak.
Councillor Nicholson, that's fine. Do we have any amendments? I've got a notification that Councillor Patterson had his hand raised, but I don't know whether that was in relation to this item or the previous discussion. Councillor Patterson, can you confirm?
It's no longer relevant, Provost, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McEwen?
Yes, thanks, Provost. As convener of the Land and Infrastructure Board, I'm delighted that during these very difficult times, our administration shows the continued sustained investment in our roads and footpaths, an investment of £9,900,000, so nearly £10 million for this financial year. A vehicle replacement programme of £1,700,000, a much needed investment to replace older fleet vehicles. We have 400 vehicles in our council fleet. This investment ensures a modern fleet that serves Renfrewshire well. I'm also delighted again to see a rolling maintenance programme for lighting column replacement to replace a percentage of our 30,000 street columns and the essential electrified wiring to replace the end-of-life columns, so essential, along with bridge and strengthening investment needed and required to maintain our extensive road and footway bridge network in Renfrewshire. £569,000 to this, and the street column lighting £630,000. An investment in cemeteries also, that continues with a further investment of £150,000. I have no hesitation in commending this investment programme and would look forward to agreement of this as it serves our council and our communities well. Thank you, Provost.
Lorraine, you're on mute.
My apologies. There's no other expressions of interest in contributing to this debate, so can we just ask that the report is accepted and agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Moving swiftly on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the Housing Revenue Account Budget and Rent Levels 2021 to 22 and Housing Capital Investment Plan 2021 to 22 to 2023 and 24. Councillor McGurk.
You're on mute, Councillor McGurk.
Looking out the window.
Okay, is that better?
Yep.
Thank you. Apologies for that. It's a bit slow this morning, this machine. Thanks for that. Right, I'll start again. Good afternoon, members. I'm pleased to present the Housing Revenue Account Budget for 2021-22 and 3-year capital plan. The past year has presented many challenges across council services and has also impacted on our housing services, most notably during the lockdown period. Housing moves were extremely restrictive and there were unavoidable delays in our housing construction programmes. Our housing officers had to quickly adapt.
Councillor McGurk, you've gone on to mute again, sorry.
Marie, somebody's muting you.
And I'm sorry, it's not showing up on my screen. It's muted.
On you go, Marie.
You know.
Right. Okay, thanks. Right, I'll go back. Our housing officers had to quickly adapt their working practice, moving to telephone-based and online services for most tenants, and also moving to proactive outreach calls, checking on the well-being of our residents. I'm incredibly proud of the work of our housing teams and the really positive feedback I received from my constituents about how much they had appreciated these proactive and supportive calls. While many of our officers work from home, many also continue to work in the front line, checking on the well-being of our older and vulnerable tenants and urgent accommodation, vulnerable tenants, making sure contact services in high-rise blocks were clean and providing temporary and urgent accommodation for those who found themselves homeless. Our teams in building services also continue to deliver urgent and essential repairs, adapting their work practice to protect and keep safe our tenants while delivering these essential repairs. And crucially, staff from across the department worked with colleagues across the council in delivering an emergency response to residents who were shielding. I was delighted that despite some delays to hand over the properties due to the pandemic, our fabulous new homes in Bishopton and Johnson Castle were
Marie, you've been muted again.
Marie?
Prior to the start of the pandemic, and I must say the quality of these homes is impressive. I'm extremely proud that as an administration we were able to bring forward to the council an additional commitment of £100 million for housing renewal and regeneration. The report to the council in December, which brought forward proposals for investment in the first phase, investment in 8 housing areas and an additional 300 new homes, is both ambitious and exciting. This work will not only transform the quality of housing, neighbourhoods and environment, but will also play a key role in the Council's economic recovery and social renewal plans. The work will also contribute to the achievement of climate change targets and will help develop a new standard for energy efficient or zero carbon housing that will not only inform our own new build programmes, but also be of national significance. The £100 million investment is over and above the investment in maintaining and improving our council homes over the next 3 years. And while I do recognise that this has been a difficult time financially for many residents, it is notable that the consultation with tenants over the proposed rent increase of 1.5% received very positive endorsement from tenants, with 78% in support of the proposed increase, saying they believe that this was a fair and reasonable increase in the circumstances and acknowledging the level of investment that has been made to the housing stock. Members, I commend this report to you. I move the report and the recommendations. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor McGurk. Councillor McNaughton, are you the seconder, yeah?
Yes, can formally second and reserve the right to come back in.
Okay, does anyone else wish to contribute to the debate, or do we have any amendments? No? Okay, the report is agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 5, which is the social renewal plan. Do we have Laura here?
Hi, Provost. Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Hi, Laura. Do you want to just give us a wee kind of brief?
Yes, no problem, Provost.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Councillors. Just checking that we were over in this afternoon there. Yes, this paper presents an outline social renewal plan for Renfrewshire in relation to the COVID response, and also in relation to work that is being undertaken in terms of addressing some of the existing inequalities across Renfrewshire's communities. The report follows on from previous reports to Council in September and also in December of last year, where the Council agreed to undertake a community impact assessment to develop a better understanding of some of the impacts of COVID across local communities. The report provides a summary of the work that has been undertaken in terms of that listening exercise and working with local people and local representative organisations to try to develop that deeper understanding. So the report sets out those initial findings in terms of some of the key issues that are currently impacting local people and communities. As you'll note from the report, there are a range of impacts that have touched everyone across Renfrewshire in terms of the restrictions and the nature of those and how they have impacted local people. And there are also aspects such as health and well-being, mental health, physical health, etc., and also the impact on children, young people and families in terms of the disruption to learning, which has also been mentioned this morning. So those are covered within the report specifically. But what the research has undoubtedly uncovered is that there has been a disproportionate impact on certain groups across our communities in Renfrewshire, and much has depended on the starting point that people had in terms of potentially some of the inequalities they were already experiencing in terms of ethnicity, in terms of disability, in terms of people in low income, etc. So the starting point appears to have been really important to people as they have tried to manage the impact, whether that's been in terms of changed employment, loss of employment, whether it's been around some of these real stresses on family relationships, and whether it's been in relation to social isolation, loneliness, mental health, etc. All of these things appear to have been significantly exacerbated by that starting point. The report notes particular issues in terms of mental health and well-being of local people throughout the course of the pandemic, and that has been raised as one of the most significant concerns during the pandemic and also now in terms of that concern about the future, and also about being unwell from COVID itself and that impact on their family. There is a clear concern around people feeling concerned about their income and their employment, with 1 in 5 people responding to a local survey stating that remains a really real concern for them in terms of that their future, in terms of their income or their employment. There are through some of the survey work we've done also, there appears to still be some level of need out there in Renfrewshire where people potentially aren't coming forward to access the range of support that the council has been providing and working with community partners, importantly, to provide. And that is something that the plan picks up on in terms of some of the targeted actions that we're proposing, to work even more closely with some of these groups to work out why there are barriers in certain places and how we can make that easier for people to access some of that support, whether it's around income advice, whether it's around access to food, or whether it's around mental health and wellbeing support. And I think that will be increasingly important as we move forward and hopefully beyond the restrictions in terms of being able to support people to reconnect and to be able to take advantage of some of these services going forward. So that the report, just to sum up, Provost, the report represents, I suppose, the end of this first stage of the community impact assessment. We recognise that some of the impacts of the pandemic will continue to emerge, particularly as schemes such as furlough, etc., end, and some of those support schemes that have been very important to people as those change over time. So we are recommending that we continue to work with local groups and local people to look at the impacts of the pandemic. And the report notes a couple of areas where we're very keen to undertake some further work with unpaid carers, with young people, and also trying to assess better the impact of people who have had health treatment or haven't come forward to access health treatment and the impact of that over time. So those are key priorities. The next stage of the process is around working with community planning partners to bring this to life and to work together to develop more detailed actions around some of these key issues. And you'll see from the action plan that's attached as appendix, we have a starting position in terms of a range of those, but we want to undertake that in a partnership response across Renfrewshire. So this is very much a first phase, and it's been a very interesting, a very welcome partnership approach that has been undertaken to date in terms of trying to gather this information. So I'm very grateful to the people across organisations and local citizens that have given their time to feed into this process. It's been fantastic to gain that insight and to be able to make sure that we can work with them in the future to try and develop a response and to target resources where they're most required. So that's all I would wish to say. Provost, thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I completely agree with you, and thank you and your team for getting that report into a form of words for us, that information to be presented to the councillors. I'm sure that they all appreciate it as much as I do, and we don't underestimate the amount of effort that it takes and that amount of collusion with your partners to gather all that information. So it's no mean feat. Now I think we might have some questions. I know that Councillor Nicholson, do you want to come in?
Yeah, Provost, I think it's redundant now because I think Laura covered off a lot of the areas, and you've covered off the other bit I wanted to mention. But I just wanted to raise the point that to express my thanks to the officers who've drawn together this significant piece of work. It paints a stark picture with regards to the impact of COVID on our local communities, and particularly school children. But it recognises the work that's been done by community groups, all of them volunteers, as part of the pandemic response. The appendix itself is the bit of the report that sort of points the direction of travel here. It's a piece of work which we're hoping to progress as quick as we can, obviously, while we're still hopefully coming out of the pandemic just now, to the next board cycle. And I'm hoping that all members of the council will support the social renewal programme as it evolves through, because again it will indicate a partnership approach to this, which we've demonstrated so far with all our community groups, all our third sectors and elected members as well, Provost. So that was basically what I was going to say, and it's been said a minute ago by yourself, so I'm just reiterating it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Devine.
Thanks, Provost. Like you've said and Councillor Nicholson said, This is a very good report, but it's also an eye-opening report. Yep. When you look at the figures, and I'm not going to go on because we've got a lot of business to get through, but I'll just point you in the direction of page 121, bullet point 4.2.2. There, that's about mental health and the rest of it. And if I could point you also to page 127, and it's the third and fourth bullet points in relation to employment and lockdown, and indeed the incredible increase in universal credit. It's, as I say, I've already said to Laura, it's an unfortunate. When I say excellent, I don't mean excellent. It's a great report. It's a great report, but it's not good news for us, and it's something that we all have to look forward, work towards to get us out of this, because it is going to be a long, hard road after. Hopefully, we get a grip of this pandemic. Thanks, Provost.
Thanks, Councillor Devine. Councillor Sharkey.
Certainly, I'd like to associate myself with what Councillor Devine said there, but and it's vitally important that we do have a proper contemporaneous record, right, of the impact of the disease and knowing how we responded to it. But one of the things that I'm not seeing here, and perhaps give Laura a chance to comment on it, or perhaps it's the further work that Councillor Nicholson was talking about. But what behaviours are most effective in spreading COVID?
Is that a question for Laura?
Yes.
Okay, now I know that Laura is not a COVID expert, but Laura, if you want to give your opinion.
That's entirely accepted, right?
I'm sure. I was going to say it. I'm sure that'll be accepted by Councillor Sharkey. Yeah. Laura.
Thank you, Provost. Thanks, Councillor Sharkey. The work that we have done today hasn't focused specifically on that aspect. I know that there are national research reports that do look at those particular instances. In terms of the behaviours, what we've looked at is how behaviours have changed as a result. So in terms of things around how people are maybe accessing green space more, how people are potentially more active in walking places, etc. We haven't specifically looked at that aspect of the transmission of the virus, just the ultimate result of that. So I think there would be a need to look at some of those national reports, Councillor Sharkey. I don't have a particular response in terms of the work that we've done, but we'd be happy to provide some of that national work if that would be helpful.
That would be very helpful, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sharkey. Councillor McGurk.
Right. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Right, okay. Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I just want to reiterate some of the comments that have already been made. This work has been absolutely essential for us going forward, and I'm delighted that Laura and the team have produced this paper today, and I'm really quite glad of the response we're getting from members, because going forward we have a lot of work to do to try and help our communities and get them back up and feeling more confident in themselves and getting back out there and engaging with each other. I'm not too sure, Councillor Sharkey, about the relationship about, what's really causing most of the problems. I mean, the information I receive on a daily basis indicates people gathering very closely rather than paying attention to wearing their mask and social distancing. But I'm sure the Scottish Government will produce a report on that shortly. But I think it's onus on all of us as members is to lead this forward and to help our community to get back out there and be part of a community again. And I look forward to being part of that. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor McGurk. I'm just double checking that no one else has expressed an interest to speak so far. No, okay. So we can accept the report, agree the report, and move on to item 7, which is the independent review of adult social care. I think this is Laura again.
You've missed item 6, Provost.
Sorry?
You've missed item 6.
Oh, so I did. I'm forever in your debt, Eddie.
Don't say it, just get his tablet.
Item 6. The governance arrangements. Okay.
Agreed.
Does anybody want to speak to item 6? Any contributions? Someone has a question. Okay. Hold on to see who this is. Councillor, I'm going to bring in Councillor Begg first. Is this on item 6 you want to speak, Councillor Begg, or item 7?
It was on 6 actually, but it's knowing where to put it. I just wanted to make sure after Marie mentioned, thanks to the people who've been working at home, has everybody been told that they're entitled to £6 a week to take off their tax and apply for it?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to check that the council aren't doing that in my own tax code, so that I don't double do it myself. So what's the situation with respect to that £6? The council's doing nothing, is that correct?
Tom, are you raising this under item 6?
Well, it's item 5.
Governance.
No, it's item 5.
Sorry.
I was looking for somebody where there was something to do. I thought on item 6 is somebody from finance speaking.
Can we not get somebody, Councillor Begg, tax advice in his own time rather than use up a public meeting?
What I'm saying is that we have dozens of employees, hundreds of employees who may or may not have been advised of this information and should be told of it so that they can get their £300 worth of tax added to the tax code.
That's something
tax year is just coming up. Excuse
me, Councillor Begg, that's information we'll seek from the officers and let you know, okay? Right now on item 6.
It was something that the whole group would need to know.
The whole will know. The whole group will know.
Okay, that was all. I'll go away. Bye.
Councillor Andy Doig.
Provost, it was a question under item 6.
Thank you.
Thanks. You're welcome, Provost. Right, I noticed that in the schedule, the next scheduled meeting of the full council was on the 6th of May, which is also the day of the Scottish elections. Now, I know that these have fallen together previously, and the council has tended to make other arrangements, but it's still in item 6 as being scheduled for the 6th of May. Can you clarify the position, please, Provost?
Yeah, Ken?
Yes, well spotted, Councillor Doig. That has been changed. The meeting is actually the following week, so apologies that should have been changed in the schedule. I think it's an old schedule that's been used rather than the one to take into account the previous council decision to move the meeting a week further. So yes.
That's good. Okay, thanks, Ken.
Councillor Doig, and thank you for raising it. Okay, Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I was actually going to raise that one too, so well done, Andy. But I just wanted to say, if it's okay to do it here, to thank Councillor Kevin Montgomery and Councillor Colin McCulloch and Councillor Jane Strang for their commitment to the tax board when they were members. They made a great contribution. I never get a chance to say that at the last tax board, and I thought we'd take this opportunity. But I look forward to work with Councillor Devine and Councillor Sheridan when they come on board. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it as well.
Councillor McEwen.
Thanks, Provost. I want to do the same. Councillor Caroline Davidson, I would like to thank you for your contribution during your years in the Land Infrastructure and Environment Board. I always found you a very fair member of my board who would always bring relevant questions to my attention. I'm sorry to see that you're no longer going to be on the board. I'm sure you've got your own reasons for this, but I do really want to take the opportunity to state again how valuable your comments and involvements were. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Councillor McEwen. Let me see now. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Provost. I just want to say that as much as I appreciate that each group has their own decisions to make about these things, it once again highlights the underrepresentation of women in council, especially the removal of women from boards. We might have a majority in administration, but this council is not majority female. So this once again reminds us of that sobering fact, and I hope that when it comes to the local elections next year, that we'll see a far more diverse range of candidacy, and for sitting on the councils as well, I want to see a majority of women sitting here making the decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Many thanks, Convener. I would just also like to pay tribute to the members who are coming off the Education and Children's Service Policy Board, and Councillor Bibby and Councillor Davidson are coming off. Both have provided contributions of an extremely high quality over the last 4 years, and I know the fact that they're no longer board members won't stop them asking the officers the relevant questions, and encourage them to continue to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have no other, no one else is interested in entering this item for debate or with questions, so we'll just move on and we'll agree this item. And that was item 6, the governance arrangements. Item 7 is the independent review of adult social care, and as I said, I think that's Laura again. But Laura, instead of bringing you in just now, I hope it's okay with you if I just ask members to raise any questions that they have and you can answer them. And if there's anything at the end that you feel hasn't been covered and that you want to say, then I'm happy to let you in at that point. Councillor Bibby has previously intimated to me that he would like to speak in this item, so I'm going to bring him in just now. Councillor Bibby.
Thank you, Provost. I'm having problems with the connection, so like Councillor Patterson, I'll leave the camera off. They help. Can I broadly welcome this report? I'm old enough to have worked in social care in the early 70s when people not profit was the motive, and there was local accountability for services which were provided by local councils. So in broadly welcoming the report, it's based on improving the service for adults and older people. And in many ways, that sector has been the correlation in terms of comparisons with criminal justice and childcare over the decades. And as a result, we have a workforce which is underpaid and undervalued. And I think the report, in actual fact, addresses that issue. And I welcome the fact that there are proposals regarding conditions of service, development, and obviously pay. And I know that this has been welcomed cross-party. It's been a policy of the Labour Party for a national care service for some time. So I broadly welcome that. And in particular, I would also want to highlight the proposal or recommendation to include respite as a legal right in the Carers Act, which I think is a major step forward, because respite, as we know, is one of the key areas where carers actually look for support. I do, however, have a number of issues and a number of concerns which are raised in the report that's been provided by Laura, and I would thank her for that, and also Derek Feely for his original report. I think to some extent COVID has kind of overtaken the detail in the report. There is one specific reference to COVID, and I understand why that is, because obviously the report was issued in September of the year when we were coming out of the first lockdown. And to some extent, the future discussion of this report and also the setting up of the care service has to be in the context of the COVID recovery plan. And there's a couple of major issues, obviously, that stand out. One is the situation in care homes, which has been nothing short of a tragedy, as we know, and we should never, in any context, have that kind of experience again for people who are in care and people who've lost loved ones. There's also in the report a recognition that mental health was not covered in detail in the report, and we have at various meetings and in terms of various other items concentrated on the mental health crisis, which is widely reported. So in actual fact, I would want, obviously, COVID and mental health, and I suspect that this will be the case, to be to be the recovery plan to be embedded in the National Care Service. But my main concern is to do with democratic accountability. It's proposed in the paper that actually a minister will be appointed with accountability for local services. That I think is a major problem. Members will know that I have had concerns right from the outset regarding the IJB in its current form and the democratic accountability that's accorded there. The centralising agenda, which the report is predicated upon, does not lie comfortably with the idea of local services, and the term local delivery of services by councils, I think in actual fact needs far more explanation. There's also the issue of the funding challenge. I mean, £600 million, which is the amount that's quoted in the report, will only scratch the surface. We know that some of our specialist placements cost a considerable amount of money. Notwithstanding that, local government probably on the funding model that's suggested is in actual fact best placed to provide local services. So I think the governance arrangements are clearly something that actually have to be addressed. And I know COSLA have raised this issue. Local services should be provided by local councils. And as I say, way back in the early 70s, when I worked in the sector, it was a case of people, not profit. And thankfully, the report spirit returns to that concept. Sadly, there seemed to be a maxim at the time that if it wasn't broken, we'll fix it anyway. But it's a positive step. It's a promising first step. There's much work to be done, but I would certainly commend the report to the members and look forward to seeing further detail on the issues I've outlined. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Bibby. Councillor McCartan, do you want to come in? I believe you also have an amendment.
Yes, Provost, I have an amendment which I sent to David Lowe, so hopefully he will be able to send it to all the councillors if he hasn't already done it.
Okay, Dave, can you let me know when you have done that, please?
And
that's now being sent, Provost.
I'll just, it's very small, so I can just read it out.
Hold on a wee minute, Eileen. Can I just let everyone know that the amendment has been emailed to them? You won't find it in the chat. Okay, Eileen, sorry if you want to go on.
And it's the amendment is under recommendations to add as a third bullet point to write to the Scottish Government advising them of our objection to removing responsibility for social care from local councils. That's it. It very much reflects what Councillor Bibby has just said about the democratic accountability. I was appalled to see that and to understand that the SNP government is designing yet another way of taking services and responsibility from local government. Yes, we need to look at a far upgraded adult care service and one which is properly funded from the government with a robust inspection process done by the government. What concerns me is, you know, are the SNP councillors in this council happy to roll over in this one? I'm quite sure they're not, but I would like to hear them saying that. While the council notes that the contents of the review itself are good, it should utterly reject the removal of yet another major service from local government to centralised management by the Scottish Government. As part of the Scottish Government's response to this report, it should recognise the vital role that local government plays in understanding its community and having the correct level of management control to provide this service, so long as it is given considerably more than the inadequate funding that it has at present. While the framework of the service should be established by the government, its implementation should remain with local councils. I hope all the councillors will support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCartan. I think that I'll ask for a mover of the report then, seeing as we have an amendment. I think that Councillor Nicholson, will probably do that, yeah?
Yeah. Hi,
Provost, and you would be your seconder?
Provost, it's myself, Councillor Andy Doig. I'm seconding Councillor McCartan's amendment.
I'm talking to Councillor Nicholson just now. I'm looking for a seconder for the.
It's me, Lorraine, Councillor Cameron.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, Andy, you're the seconder of the amendment. Do you want to speak just now, or do you want to come in later?
No, I'll speak just now, Provost. I think there should be a consensus amongst us about this whole issue. Somebody who's worked in social care for nearly 25 years, not as long as Councillor Bibby certainly, but long enough, I think there's a real issue about terms, conditions for staff, for workers, training opportunities as well. These have improved in that time that I've been in social care, but we've still got a long way to go. And because of that, I've always been in favour of the principle of a national care service. And we've seen how the impact of the COVID crisis, I think, has sharpened the focus on that need. But it really, I can't be forceful enough, Provost, as to how passionate I feel about the amendment by Councillor McCartan, because we have seen the centralisation of Police Scotland, we've seen the centralisation of social work, we've seen the powers taken away from this chamber to Holyrood. Now, whether that's by deliberation or by design or by default, I'm never quite sure, because at the end of the day, Holyrood is a pocket money parliament. They've got it, they get what they're given by Westminster, and there's been a tendency in the last 10 years, sadly, to try and salami pair off money that should maybe be going to local government that they've kept for their own pet projects. And I think this is terribly sad. And can I say I disagree with Councillor McCartan on one thing? She's thrown open a challenge to the SNP councillors in the chamber. I would aim the bar a wee bit higher than that. I'd open a challenge to the SNP government, most of whom weren't alive when in the early 70s, when the late SNP intellectual Stephen Maxwell said that if SNP philosophy is about anything, it's about decentralisation. Unfortunately, devolution has turned the SNP into a centralist party, and it's not good for communities. In its whole culture now, Holyrood is starting to become a mini Westminster in so many ways. It's a very detrimental development. I want to have local operational control here in Renfrewshire based on principles of subsidiarity. Now that means if we can do it locally, we should be able to do it, because we're the ones who know our community, we know what the issues are. Centralisation of services and powers never tends to end up well. And the Holyrood Parliament is very good at telling the councils what we should do. Let's do something different and tell them what we want them to do for a change and keep control in Renfrewshire. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Councillor Doig. Councillor Brown?
Right.
Councillor Brown, are you okay?
Councillor Brown, you're on mute.
That's for these machines are like. I mean, the phrases jumped out to me. The accountability should move from local government to Scottish ministers. The creation of a national care service with its own board. If that's advisory, fine. Local authorities should no longer be responsible. That concerns me very much, and that we have very local care homes and they're well served by the staff. Right. All I would say is that, and I note that when it comes down to the recommendation, is that we note the contents of the report. We're not agreeing to it. Similarly, note that further updates, we will look forward to these updates and scrutinise them thoroughly. But I totally reject the idea of handing something else over to Holyrood just to make a mess of it. Okay.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Devine?
Thanks, Provost. I agree with what Councillor McCartan's put forward. I don't think it's unreasonable to add this on at the end, or to send a letter to the Scottish Government. To be fair, I think in Councillor Nicholson, I'm looking for him on the screen, I think we'd a vote at COSLA, Ian, and I think COSLA voted for this to remain with councils. Am I correct? That was a unanimous vote.
Councillor Devine, I attended that meeting in Councillor Nicholson's absence, and you're correct. It was a unanimous. It was a Labour amendment seconded by the SNP, and it was unanimously accepted. So you're correct, aye.
So can I remind you all to speak through the chair, please?
Apologies, Provost. I think it's not unreasonable to at least write a letter to the Scottish Government and say that this council, the whole council, are for this service staying with councils. Thank you.
I'm sure that Councillor Nicholson will address that when I bring him in. Councillor McLaren, I'm not sure whether you wanted in just now or whether that's from previous debate. Councillor McLaren, can you let me know?
Provost, I think you're doing a tremendous job given the number of hands that are up. I've just put my hand up, so yes, I want to speak now.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah, I'm wholeheartedly behind Councillor McCartan in this. I think the Scottish Government is trying to exert far too much influence and power over the councils at the moment, not just in this regard, but so many other things. You know, it's as if they don't respect us as able to make any sensible decisions. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jacqueline Cameron.
Hi, Lorraine. I was going to speak after Ian.
Well, Ian's moving the report, so I was going to bring in Ian to speak and sum up. So
okay,
it's up to you.
No, that's fine. I'll speak now then. Yeah, no, it was just to say that, you know, there's a lot of positives in the report. You know, human rights approach, fair work. And we all know that there is a lack of standardisation nationally. People have different experiences in different local authorities, but absolutely it's the IJB structure and the governance arrangements that are causing a lot of people cause for concern. Things like there's a recommendation about amalgamating IJBs. Would that mean that there was a Greater Glasgow and Clyde IJB, for example, where Renfrewshire might get lost in that? Just lots of things that are concerning about the governance. And just to be clear, that the IJB chairs and vice chairs haven't adopted a position in this. There's so many perspectives on it, and so many different groups have a different interest. And there are recommendations at this stage, so I don't think the final outcome will be anything like the report. There's a lot of stages to go through before anything's actually adopted, so we'll have lots of chances to have our say in this.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Nicholson now, because although he moved the motion, he didn't get a chance to speak to it at the beginning.
Yeah. Thanks, Provost.
Ian, do you want to come in? I don't know whether you've got another
thing
to add.
Well, I sent an amendment to Dave Lowe about...
Okay, can I just double check then that's...
Yeah, about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, well, that's the addition, just sent, Provost. That's been calculated.
Okay, Ian, on you go.
That's fine. I don't think there's any issue with Councillor McCartan's addition to the report, and I'm hoping the amendment that I've just sent through will explain a wee bit, because it actually is just a section of the causeless position on it, but it's the most potent bit, I think, and it's the most clear bit in that respect with regards to the way this goes forward as to the role of local government and community-based services as a principle, and whole system approach to it as well. As what's been said by Councillor Cameron and others, this has got a long way to go, and there's a lot of good aspects in the overall report, but there's a lot of issues attached to it for local government and for different sectors and for different groups, and from a local government perspective, we as a cross-party basis, we can read a lot of concern in there. Impacts on social work going forwards, etc. So I'm kind of hoping that the addition I'm putting in this paper will provide some reassurances to members that across the local government family, if that's the way to phrase it, is that we are going to ensure that the voice of local government is fully heard, and we recognise the fact that we have a political party at the moment in the government, and if I'm speaking from a political party's perspective, at local government level, this is our view on this as well as an issue going forward, and I don't accept any sort of comments about rolling over, etc. because I think we're there to ensure that local government its voice is heard in this issue. And the main thing at the end of the day is the best possible service for our residents in care homes. So it's a long way to go on this one, and I think we're just saying the same thing, all from a different perspective. And I kind of hope this amendment, this addition to this, will lay that to rest. That it's a partly political issue at this point. It's causeless position on it, and I'm hearing what Councillor McCartney's saying as well, and Labour councillors here today, probably. So I hope that clarifies it. Thanks.
Okay, can I clarify that have you amended or made an addition to your motion?
I'm making an addition to the bullet point notes in the report.
Okay.
And I'm happy to accept Councillor McCartney's.
Okay, you're happy with that?
Yeah, and as I say, that just restates the position from a local government perspective.
Ken, can I just ask you if you have clarity on this matter?
Yes, Provost, based on what Councillor Nicholson's just said, I'm taking that essentially Councillor Nicholson's put forward a proposition that adds an additional bullet point to the existing report, which also will include Councillor McCartney's amendment, so that everything is actually included.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Councillor Sharkey, I know that you asked to come in, but I've already brought Councillor Nicholson in, who has, I suppose, done everything, summed up and spoke to his motion in a winner. So I'm going to move on now. That's the report that is agreed with the amendment. Am I right?
Agreed.
Okay. We move on now to item 8, which is the equality outcomes and mainstreaming equality. Any questions or comments? No? Agree that report?
Agree.
Agreed.
Provost, I want to come in here.
Yes, is that Councillor McLaren?
It is Councillor McLaren again.
Yes, come in.
Yeah, I noticed on 4.5 that we've got a language bank, and we've had 88 face-to-face interpreter support. I'd be interested to know how much we actually spend on interpretation for foreign speakers. I don't really think we should be pandering to foreign immigrants indefinitely. The people need to learn the English language, and we can help them with that, but we shouldn't have to keep translating for people. We've got dictionaries and apps that do the translation for people to help them. We help foreign speakers go to college, and there's abuse there as well, I understand, with people just playing it, going to the course until it's actually necessary to sit the exam. There's tremendous amount of waste of finances there. So I think we need to tighten down on this. I'm all for helping people to learn the English language, but there needs to be an end to the amount of help that we give them. They need to know that they need to learn the English language. That's all I have to say on it. I'd be interested to get the...
Okay, I will ask someone to come in and answer your question. That's if we actually have a specific or a precise figure. They may not, and it may have to get back to you. But you know, people find themselves in this country, our beautiful country, for a variety of reasons, some of which are fleeing almost, you know, threats of death and violence. So there are many reasons why we need to have a service available in order to assist those people.
But definitely,
I do not concur with some of the comments you've just made, Councillor McLaren. Can I bring someone in? Is there anyone here present in the meeting who has the answer to Councillor McLaren's question?
Provost, I don't think we do have the answer to that. It's Sandra here, but we can certainly get back to Councillor McLaren directly. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought that would be the case, Sandra. If you let all of the councillors know, please, yes. That would super.
No problem.
Thank you. And item 9 on the agenda is motion 1.
We have got my hand up.
Oh, I apologise.
I've got my hand
Sorry.
up as well.
Provost, I also have
Sorry,
my
I
hand
can
up.
see. I'm very sorry. The message, there seems to be some wee delay.
And so I
get all the messages. So, Councillor Campbell, first of all.
Thank you, Provost. I wasn't intending on speaking, but I can't not, given the commentary that's came from Councillor McLaren. I'm going to just make the point again, as I have on numerous meetings, about people and their white privilege in this meeting. It's absolutely disgraceful, and us and them attitude is a disgrace. And as an individual who is multiracial, and my own mother, English isn't her mother tongue, and she had to learn, and she faced inequalities and racism that was quite casually handed out in slab loads back in the 60s and 70s and onwards, and we still see that happen now. We might have a small minority of individuals where English is not their first language. However, with that type of attitude, how on earth can you expect people to want to face outwardly from the communities that they feel safe in expressing themselves in, if that is what you're faced with? When we're talking about inequality and wanting to have a more diverse society, we have to be the ones that have those services that are there. Now, to say that people who don't have English as their first language are lazy, sloppy, that they only turn up when they have to at the last minute, I can think of more than enough occasions when we could say that about people that have been born in this nation and have circumstances that attach to that as well. I won't go into detail because I don't discriminate, because I do believe that that is a minority of individuals. Who are we to say that we shouldn't invest in those individuals? Given that my family have served in the military, local council, we've all paid our tax, we all give back to society. Who are we to say that that isn't appropriate? I'm absolutely disgusted by the commentary that has come out of an elected member of this council. It's a disgrace. You should be ashamed of yourself. And once again, I'm absolutely fueled with rage at the fact that I'm having to share a council chamber with such ignorance and tone. And I hope that other councillors that are coming to speak on this matter, and I hope that will be on some of the same things that I've just spoken about, will share in some of the sentiments that I have just expressed. I will not be silenced on this issue, and I will call it out every time. And you see, when there's motions and there's things that happen in society that you think is politically incorrect and it's a disgrace, it's a shame, we should stand together. Do me a favour, don't actually agree if you don't actually mean it in your day-to-day, because that's what matters to people that are in the minority groups, because you don't speak for them if that is what comes out your mouth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Davidson.
Yeah, hi. I couldn't say any better than Councillor Campbell just did. I'm absolutely disgusted by Councillor McLaren's could actually voice that statement in a council meeting. An elected member should not be an elected member with those thoughts and voicing those opinions. And I just want to concur with what you yourself said, Lorraine, and what Michelle said.
Thank you, Caroline. Councillor Patterson.
Many thanks. Convener, I found the comments fairly extraordinary, and I've used the word ignorant in the sense that you think there becomes a time when English is a first language. If somebody's learned English, that's it, you're good to go. During my time as a welfare rights advisor, I met with many people whose conversational English was was good, but when they were presented with the bureaucracy in front of them is when they needed the support from a translator. So just, it's more complex than saying, oh, you've learned English, on your way. People need support for a long time regarding this. I mean, there's people with English as a first language can struggle to access some of the bureaucracy that we have as a country. So you can only imagine how much more difficult that is for somebody who's had to learn English. And the Provost touched on it. I mean, not everybody's the same, but a lot of people are here for a mixture of different reasons. Whether they're political refugees, whether they're economic migrants. And I think that attitude is just really, really retrograde. I'll be honest with you, to hear it said. And I agree, I quite often have a good relationship with Councillor McLaren, so I was surprised to hear him say it, actually, in that sense. And I hope that maybe he's maybe expressed his view incorrectly, and I would maybe give him that opportunity to maybe retract his views and maybe think about how he's expressed it.
Councillor Devine.
Thanks, Provost. I'm afraid that I've got to disagree with James in this. I would hope that James has what's the word they use now, misspoke on that. I've never found him to be like that, but we will always have, and that puts inverted, foreigners come into this country, and so we should. So we need to be there. We need to have the services there that help people to come into the culture, but they don't have to always speak English. As long as they can understand, I don't have a problem with that. I'm sorry, James. I hope you didn't mean it the way it came across, but I agree with Michelle. I'm surprised, very surprised, James.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Jacqueline Cameron.
Thanks, Provost. I think if we were standing in the chamber, sitting in the chamber, we would be standing up applauding Michelle. I thought that was a fantastic speech, Michelle. Councillor McLaren, I'm quite surprised as well. As somebody who I value your contributions in the IGB, I was quite surprised to hear some of those values and ethos coming from you. So I just like everyone else was saying, people who come to this country are welcome, and they need our support, and the valuable contribution that they give to our country is fantastic. I worked for the Scottish Refugee Council in the past. I also supported refugees as an advocacy worker, and the terrors and the horror that they're fleeing is unbelievable, and I think we should do everything in our power that we can to support them. I honestly hope, Councillor McLaren, that you didn't mean it the way that it came across, because it came across just as plain racism, to be honest. And I would think if you were an employee, you would be getting sent on some diversity training. So anyway, you and I can discuss that another time.
Thank you. Councillor Begg.
Could I just, not so much in support of James, but I'm familiar with what happens in Germany, Luxembourg and France, and they're in a different situation. You bring in your own translator. Last year I had to attend a funeral in Luxembourg, and the choice was French that we all had for the language. Unfortunately, I know French, but it is other countries have a different point of view. There are hundreds of countries in the world, and at the same time, there are even more languages. And I personally, if you could support a translator to bring in with them rather than appoint one, I think you'd be in a position, but we cannot support everyone. My daughter lives in Germany and she's had to learn German, and she has done so. It is an attitude of mind, I believe. It's not racism, it's not that, but when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And that's the way I feel on that. And eventually learn your language, and there should be support to do that.
Yeah, exactly. There should be support to do that, and I think that's probably the reason why people are at odds with what Councillor McLaren said. Okay, we have other speakers to come in. Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Provost. Like others, I find Councillor McLaren's comments quite outrageous and offensive. I mean, these views are steeped in British imperialism and no place in modern British society. I mean, people come to this country for a variety of reasons, and the need for translation services are continuous for those people whose first language is no English. It's that simple. I never thought I would hear these views in this chamber, and I'm disgusted at the ignorance shown, and I hope that he reflects on what he has stupidly and horrifically said. And excuse me, and he probably does need some diversity training after that tirade. That's absolutely disgraceful. Thanks, Provost.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Councillor Dowling.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of the comments that have been made. I was just going to leave a comment in the chat box originally, but unfortunately that function isn't working for me at the moment. I do want to support Councillor Campbell. I think that was a magnificent speech that she made, and I do want to just extend her a hug, a virtual hug, because I think we do take these things very personally at times when we have such direct experience of the impact of some unpleasant attitudes. I don't want to appear to be part of a pile-on. I know that's no one else's intentions either, but I do think it is important just to point out a few extra facts that in Scotland we do experience a demographic time bomb at the moment. We have got a severe population decline that, if it doesn't reverse, we will face difficulties going forward, and inward immigration is a large part in addressing that. So we actually depend economically in Scotland for the influx of our immigrant population. There is mass amount of research that demonstrates that on the whole, the tax contribution exceeds any drain in the public purse that immigrants make. You know, in other words, most of the people that come to this country, once they're settled, once they're stabilised, they engage in work, they pay their taxes, and that way exceeds anything that they take out of the system in terms of direct financial support. And I think that's very important to point out when you think that in the last financial year, 2019 to 2020, Scotland's fiscal deficit rose to £15 billion, which is roughly £2,000 for every man, woman and child in this country. We need our tax take to increase. So for you know, just for moral reasons, but also these economic reasons, I think some of these comments that were made were misplaced, and I would like the councillor to reflect. And perhaps, you know, just to be charitable, I think he's a decent man. I don't think that he meant to cause this level of offence, and I hope that he has a chance to reflect on that. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'm going to allow him to do that, Alison. I do have other speakers who want to come in first, though. Councillor McCartan.
Thank you, Provost. Like others, I was somewhat surprised and disappointed by Councillor McLaren's comments. I didn't think he had it in him to say something like that. It somewhat took my breath away. And Councillor Campbell's comments, absolutely spot on. It's so important for us. I have to say, Councillor Begg's additions just kind of put fuel to the fire a little bit. Basically what he's saying is you can have an interpreter if you can afford it. My 4 grandparents were all immigrants, and you know, throughout the last 100 years they have produced teachers and doctors and even politicians, and you know, people who have made huge contributions to this country. Councillor Dowling said very much what I was going to say in terms of the fact that we need more immigrants to come into this country. Otherwise, this country is going to go down the economic Swanee. And it is very, very important that we welcome immigrants. Most immigrants will require some, or many immigrants will require some requirement for interpreters for a while. They will try to learn the language, and they will move forward, and they will contribute to this country. And I just, unbelievably, I'm almost speechless.
Thank you, Eileen. Councillor Hughes.
Thanks. Sorry. Thanks, Provost. I would like to say I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised. I think when you listen to the comment made by our colleague in this virtual chamber today, it goes alongside the cuts to child credits, the cuts to support for people who are disabled, cuts to support for people who have come from different countries. I think it's the Tory agenda all over, and I think Councillor McLaren's just spoken it loud and clear.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Let's see, Councillor Mags McLaren.
I won't add to what everybody else has already said, but I would like to make one other point, and I wasn't going to come in, but I have to say, on a weekly basis, at least as a councillor for the area with the largest minority ethnic population in Renfrewshire and working in an MP's office, we deal with people on a weekly basis who have no recourse to public funds, and suggesting anybody should just go out and get their own interpreter is very insulting, and that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Councillor McEwen.
I wasn't going to come in, but I'm getting angrier by the minute. Councillor James McLaren, I had a lot of respect for you. I am very disappointed with your comments today. You, sir, are going to have to answer for those racist comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, I'm going to end the commentary there, and I'm going to allow Councillor James McLaren to come back in, because I feel that he deserves it. As quite a lot of people have pointed out, you know, James is a good man and we don't doubt that. But I'm going to give him the opportunity to address both his comments and the comments of some of the other councillors on what he said today. Councillor McLaren, do you want to come back in?
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, I obviously have apologised for any offence caused. I don't think I'm a racist. I understand we have a lot of foreign people living in this country. I'm married to one myself, and we do need to help people to learn the English language, and I'm very keen to see that and support that in teaching and supporting as much as possible. And yeah, okay, I apologise.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, if I can, I know we've spent quite a little bit of time on that, so I'll just remind you that we were actually discussing motion 8, that was equality outcomes and mainstreaming equality, and we had agreed the report effectively when Councillor McLaren wanted to speak. So can we agree the report again, just for clarity?
Great.
Great.
Okay, and move on to item 9, which is the first motion today, motion 1 by Councillor Burns and Patterson. Councillor Burns.
Thanks, Provost. I'll read out the motion. The Council condemns the use of fire and rehire tactics by employers that calls on companies currently engaged in the process cease to engage the workforce and trade unions for a better constructive way forward. I've just got a couple of words to say about it. As we know, during the pandemic, there's been quite a lot of the larger companies that took advantage of the hire and for the fire and rehire. In Renfrewshire, I believe we condemn the tactics, the fire and rehire, and we urge all employers to work with employees and the trade unions moving forward for the best practice and outcome. As we've seen recently in the press, one of the bigger ones, British Gas, they left an elderly woman, knowing my word and another word, days and days without heating due to this ongoing dispute, which is one of the companies. So I just urge everybody to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burns. Councillor Patterson.
Many thanks, Provost. I'll be brief because I'd imagine there was largely agreement on this. But just to say that I find the tactics of fire and rehire, which are being considered by companies and used in some cases, to name a few, are British Gas, British Airways and Tesco, and I find these tactics extremely objectionable, and they essentially should be illegal, as the case is in many other European countries. Now, in my other role, I'm aware that Gavin Newland's MP has raised this continuously with the government and even introduced a bill to outlaw the practice, and that although that bill got cross-party support, and by that I mean it got backbenchers from every party, unfortunately it failed to gain the kind of frontbench support it required to progress, and hopefully it would have become law to outlaw this kind of practice. But I'm hoping that if we continue to raise it, as other MPs are continuing to raise it now, that it does become law. The only thing I will say is I'm pleased in some instances to see employers back away from this tactic and get back round the table with the relevant trade unions, although in some cases that's been at the request of the courts rather than the moral, rather than for the moral reasons to do so. So I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I've had notification that there are 2 amendments. One from Councillor Sheridan, is that correct? And one from Councillor Andy Doig.
correct.
Yeah. Okay, I'll bring Councillor Sheridan in first, please. Okay. If you could just tell me who your seconder is, Councillor Sheridan.
Councillor Sharkey.
That's correct.
Okay. Have you given your amendment to Dave for distribution?
Yeah.
Promise, that's circulated.
It's circulated, okay. And Councillor Doig, have you given yours to Dave for circulation?
Yeah, I have indeed. Could Councillor Sheridan, for brevity, could he perhaps read out his amendment, please, Provost, so we can...
I'm going to ask him to do that.
Aye, okay, thanks.
Right, Councillor Sheridan, if you want to go ahead.
I need to get it on my phone, Provost.
No,
okay?
don't worry about it. Take your time. Your seconder is Councillor Sharkey. Andy, who's your seconder?
And Councillor McCartan.
Councillor McCartan, that's fine. And we'll just allow Councillor Sheridan the time to access his amendment.
It's an addition, Provost.
It's an addition, okay.
I can read it out if you want.
If Councillor Sheridan's okay with you doing that, then that's okay. I'll accept that.
Okay, it just says that this council seeks to discourage said practice by ensuring suppliers tendering for council contracts commit to fair competition that does not exploit people's job insecurity.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Sheridan. Do you want to say any more?
Yeah, it's just to say very briefly, I'm conscious of the time, but this addition is genuinely put forward to support the initial motion and complement it. But I do react to the rallying call made earlier by Councillor Patterson that opposition parties should become more inclusive. Can I just say that from a Labour Party's perspective, we are well ahead of you, Councillor Patterson. We have become, we've been re-educated about being more inclusive in opposition. But it's just, this is a bad practice. It's a horrible practice, and it's one that's getting out of hand now. And the way I put it is simply this: all or many of us on this call, or indeed any parliamentarians who seek to stand for election or indeed re-election, you could imagine the uproar there would be if after they stood down to be re-elected again, and once they're re-elected, their terms and conditions are changed to a detrimental factor. I'm sure they would be upset about it. And this is a practice that we cannot allow, and that's why we're asking for the council to encourage or ensure that when these companies are applying for tenders, that we remind them of the practices expected by Renfrewshire Council. And if they want the contract, then they behave themselves. But not only that, by doing this, they're undermining other companies who behave themselves. Other good progressive employers have been undermined by these sharp practices. And as someone said earlier, big companies like Tesco's, British Airways, British Gas or Scottish Gas, whatever it may be, it's just unacceptable. And I would like to think that we could support this addition to the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Sharkey?
Formally second.
Okay. Councillor Doig?
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Do you wish me to read out my amendment as well? It has been posted to David. I'll read it out.
Please, if you don't mind.
Okay, Provost. This is an addition to the like Councillor Sheridan's amendment. This is an addition to the main motion, which I think is a very good motion. Council notes both the economic and social value of the dignity of labour and believes that a policy of employee participation at board level and a system of employee shares based on the German model would improve economic performance and promote social cohesion. Council accordingly calls for the repatriation of all employment law from Westminster to Holyrood to facilitate the rollout of this policy across Scotland. I think Councillor Patterson's and Councillor Burns' motion is excellent. It raises a real issue that's becoming more and more apparent, Provost, in the current climate, about more and more workers whose economic certainties in life are becoming very, very much cut back and marginalised. and this is really important to deal with this issue. The point of the amendment is to take this a step further, because at the end of the day, if you look at countries like Germany, which incidentally still has a viable manufacturing sector, and it's kind of debatable at the point if you could say that either the UK or Scotland has as much manufacturing as any modern economy would need. Germany still has a viable manufacturing sector, and I think one of the reasons for their success has been the fact that they provide employee shares and employee representation in companies above a certain size. And I think it's important that we look to this in the post-COVID environment. We've spoken a lot about getting out of the COVID crisis. I don't want to get out of the COVID crisis to go back to what we had before. I want to get out of the COVID crisis to go one step further and better. And what's often missing when we talk about the economy and manufacturing is we're well aware about the needs of capital. We're well aware about the needs of labour. We don't often talk about the missing third equation, which is community. Because if we think back, Provost, to the devastation that Thatcher and the Tories inflicted in Scottish manufacturing in the early 80s, that community element the communities were devastated by the economic closures. So we need to look at a way to bring not just capital and labour in discussion, but also bring in the communities as well. And I think employee shareholding and employee representation is one way to do that. And I think as well as for workers, it would also increase a sense of pride in their job and make them feel connected to what they're doing, because an awful lot of mental health problems stem from economic alienation. Provost, people who might be in jobs that are extremely boring, they don't feel connected. They have to do it because they need a wage, they need to feed their families, but ultimately they don't get much satisfaction back as workers. If people feel connected to something, they're more liable to contribute better if they feel they're getting something back and they in turn are valued. And I think this is what the point of the amendment is. We need to move forward. This country's at least 50 years behind Germany and other countries that have this kind of economic system, and it's something that I feel passionately about, and I would ask members to support the amendment as an addition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doig. Councillor McCartan?
Yes, I don't have very much to add to that. I very much agree with the sentiments of the motion, but I felt that the wording of our amendment hopefully could take this forward a little. It's been talked about for years. There's been very little movement in some companies. It works perfectly well in other companies. I do know at least one company where it has worked for years, and it's the right way to do it. But I think things like dignity of respect for the workforce and their contribution to our communities, that is what we need to focus on. I think in the initial stages, what is said in the motion is absolutely correct, but we also need to be looking towards the future and towards other more enlightened countries to ensure that the workforce gets the dignity it deserves.
Thank you, Councillor McCartan. Councillor Shaw wishes to speak.
Thanks, Provost. I've got no issue with either motion on the face of it, and I'd happily support both. But can I just, I don't know, I don't see Bridget here. Maybe Ken can advise. I'm not entirely sure whether Councillor Sheridan's is competent, and it's something that we'd actually be able to do to form part of a decision process when it comes to procurement.
So, Councillor Mackay.
Yes, thank you, Provost. It's Councillor Doig's amendment I'd like to talk about. I think it's quite important that employees have some attachment to the business they're in. And I do think that having employee share ownership and perhaps a say on the board has good value. I would describe that as the John Lewis philosophy. I'm not sure whether others would agree with that, and that seems to work quite well. The only issue I have regarding Councillor Doig's amendment is that many of the big employers are based in England, and if you have a system in Scotland it will only apply to the employers who are based in Scotland. So you could actually end up with a rather two-tier system that's difficult to enforce. And I'd just like to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Councillor McNaughton.
Thanks, Provost. I think first of all, I mean, it's sad that this motion has to be brought at in this day and age. It's a very good motion, and I commend the Councillor Burns for bringing it. The action of some employees is appalling, and I think it's time that we stood up and said that. The two amendments I have no problem with in sentiment, but I would reflect Councillor Shaw's comment about whether the Labour amendment is what it actually means. But in terms of its sentiment, I wholeheartedly support it.
Thank you, Councillor McNaughton. Yeah, Councillor Shaw did raise an issue there. I'm going to actually bring in Councillor. I don't know whether I've promoted you, Ken, or demoted you. Can I bring in Ken Graham, please?
Thank you, Provost. Councillor Shaw actually does raise a significant issue. I mean, I think members will be familiar that we've been through across this area on a number of issues in the past. It's the extent to which procurement can be used in relation to achieving certain objectives. So, I mean, we've been through it with I suppose, issues such as blacklisting and ensuring the payment of a living wage. And so I hope members are familiar with the concept that trying to achieve things through procurement is very difficult, particularly in relation to issues that, no matter how objectionable you might think practices are, we've already mentioned today that what's happening isn't contrary to law. So the extent to which, through a procurement process, you can specify that someone shouldn't do something which they are legally able to do is quite problematic for us. Now, to get a definitive legal view on the extent to which you could try and specify that would take longer than we've probably got this afternoon to do that. I mean, all I can do is caution elected members that, I mean, certainly we could, you could commit to the council could do whatever it can permitted by law to do something. But to have a blanket commitment to do something where, I think experience has shown us that it's something that's actually very, very difficult to achieve is a different matter. So I would certainly caution members in relation to the effect of the Labour Group amendment.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you. Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Provost. On Councillor Doig's amendment, the German model is not the only way of achieving industrial democracy. And I think Councillor Sheridan once wrote a paper around the Swedish model of achieving industrial democracy.
Thank you.
The amendment.
Sorry, I thought you were finished, Councillor Hart. Sorry. I apologise.
His amendment seeks to impose the German model without having discussion. I mean, it seems a bit ridiculous and undemocratic. So there should be whatever type of model or models that you want to bring in to achieve that level of industrial democracy, and that should be open to proper discussion and scrutiny. On Councillor Sheridan's amendment, there is a section in the Public Contract Scotland regulations which refer to adhering to collective agreements. So you can legally impose on a company that they adhere to collective agreements, and that would ensure proper terms and conditions. And I'm sure Ken's aware of that. I mean, I understand the kind of nervousness around that, but it is there. It did come from the European Union, which was developed into the Public Contract Scotland regs, and it's also in the Public Contracts regs down in England and Wales as well. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. I'm going to bring in Councillor Sheridan, and then Councillor Shaw, I think, has another question. Okay, Councillor.
Thanks, Provost. The report that Councillor Hart refers to was copied from the political activities in Sweden, and it was about allowing workers onto boards. I think it was referred to earlier, but unfortunately it didn't get the political support that it deserved. But just responding, unfortunately, to Councillor Shaw and Councillor McNaughton, this tactic, shall we say, of every time workers try to move forward, they bring in the lawyers to hold them back again. And this is exactly what's happening again. Ken knows that there's nothing wrong with this. And we can, the day that an hour that we cannot stand up for fellow workers who have been treated the way that some of these workers have been treated, and hiding behind legalities is disgraceful, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, I'm really not happy about you casting aspersions on Ken. Ken has got no reason to lie to any of us.
I never said he lied.
Well, you alluded that he wasn't being honest. We'll see, we can watch it back and we can see what your language was, Councillor, but I wasn't happy with it. Councillor Shaw.
I'm gobsmacked by Councillor Sheridan's response there. He's got his paranoid on again in terms of we're not trying to do you in here, Jim. We're trying to help you and get this through in a way that works, as opposed to you just trying to, you know, fire something through that's not actually going to mean anything at any point because it's not competent. So if that means that we put in something that's, if it's lawful or whatever, or if that means that, from what Jim Hart said there, there appears to be something already in the PCS regulations which covers this. So why are we doing it again? So it makes no sense either way to send something through that's not competent. We want something, we agree with it. And as I said when I came in, I'd be happy for it to go through if it is competent and it is actually going to mean something. But if it's not competent, it doesn't mean anything, then there's no point. So, you either change the wording to have in, if it's lawful, or, we could write to PCS to have them include it within their regulations. There are other ways around this, Jim, but we were absolutely supporting you before you came out with that nonsense.
Councillor Sharkey.
Yeah, well, I'd certainly like to come in and defend Ken in this, because I don't think the distraction that's been thrown up here really is bears itself out when you examine the tape again, as the Provost suggests. In fact, it was Ken who was actually telling us that the problem here is the law, and the laws in this country are very much written in favour, and have been for a good 30 years, written in favour of people who believe in the right of managers to manage, in the right of an individual owner or even a big company, right, to tell people what to do. And that's really what we're discussing here. And I think, if we're looking back at the tapes again, you really ought to listen again to what Councillor Doig said, about the community, because it did strike a chord with me. I can remember back when I worked for a big industry that there was social clubs associated with that. Now, they were run by the workers, not by the company, for that. When we had the retired members' nights, right, they were run by us. We did that, and there was often children's parties and, Christmas events and all sorts of community activity associated around that workplace, and that was the real connection that people felt with that that particular industry, and that was robbed from us, right, by a Thatcher government that wanted, right, to have untrammeled capitalism running there. Now, people earlier on said people's opinions sometimes pop out, right, in unexpected places, and I think it was Councillor Hughes that said she wasn't surprised to hear a certain point of view from a Conservative, right? I would agree with her on that. I don't find myself surprised when I hear that. Now, one of the other groups that Conservatives are particularly keen on getting down on are organised workers. And organised workers are despised by Tories because they ask for that share in their industry. They ask for the right to say something, to negotiate how things can be done. And frankly, right, if you don't accept the Labour motion there, our amendment, What you're in fact saying is that we're perfectly happy to deal with the sort of company that it would tell us to go and chase ourselves over trade unions' rights, over communities, over doing the right thing. And frankly, I'd ask that question of each one of us. Why would you want to deal with a company like that? Yeah. Pass the Labour amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Kennedy.
I'd just like to add that in no way did I hear Councillor Sheridan call anyone a liar. So I really do hope, Provost, that you do look back on it and issue an apology.
Yeah, I'll do what I think's right. Councillor McNaughton.
Sorry, Provost, I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, you didn't? Okay, then. Okay, I don't think anyone else wishes to speak. So I'll ask Councillor Burns, first of all, if he's willing to accept any of the amendments.
Thanks, Provost. Will accept Councillor Doig's amendment, not the Labour's.
Okay, we'll go to the vote then.
Thank you, Provost. It's a roll call vote. We have the motion moved by Councillor Burns, seconded by Councillor Patterson, which now includes the amendment by Andy Doig, Councillor Andy Doig, seconded by Councillor McCartan. And on the other side, we have the amendment by Councillor Sheridan, seconded by Councillor Sharkey. Members, please indicate if they're voting for the amended motion by Councillor Burns or the amendment by Councillor Sheridan. No. Councillor Adam McGregor.
Motion.
Councillor Begg.
Amendment.
Councillor Bibby.
Amendment.
Councillor Binks.
Amendment.
Councillor Brown. Councillor Brown.
Amendment.
Councillor Burns.
Motion.
Councillor Jacqueline Cameron.
Motion.
Provost Cameron.
Motion.
Councillor Campbell.
Motion.
Councillor Davidson.
Amendment.
Councillor Devine. Councillor Devine.
Amendment.
Councillor Andy Doig.
Motion.
Councillor Audrey Doig.
Motion.
Councillor Dawn.
Motion.
Councillor Dowling.
Amendment.
Councillor Grady.
Amendment.
Councillor Graham.
Amendment.
Councillor Hart.
Amendment.
Councillor Hood.
Amendment.
Councillor Hughes.
Motion.
Councillor Kennedy.
Amendment.
Councillor Kerr.
Amendment.
Councillor Mack. Councillor Mack. You maybe come back to Councillor Mack. I can't see if he's actually at the meeting.
Yeah, if you want to come back at the end.
Yeah. Councillor Mackay.
Amendment.
Councillor James McLaren.
Amendment.
Councillor Kenny McLaren.
Motion.
Councillor Max McLaren.
Motion.
Councillor McCartan.
Motion.
Councillor McCulloch.
Amendment.
Councillor McEwen.
Motion.
Councillor McGurk.
Motion.
Councillor McIntyre.
Amendment.
Councillor McNaughton.
Motion.
Councillor Montgomery.
Amendment.
Councillor Milat.
Motion.
Councillor Nicholson.
Motion.
Councillor Patterson.
Motion.
Councillor Rodden.
Motion.
Councillor Sharkey.
Amendment.
Councillor Shaw.
Motion.
Councillor Sheridan.
Amendment.
Councillor Steele.
Motion.
And Councillor Strang.
Amendment.
And just one last chance if Councillor Mack's available.
Hello, London. Hello. Ken. Hello. I'm on. Can you hear me, Mother?
Yes, we can hear you, Councillor.
Thank you. I seek your guidance in this. Am I allowed to vote on this matter, given our previous discussions off-piste?
Yes, Councillor Mack, there's no reason why you can't vote on this matter.
I'll vote on amendment.
I have 21 for the motion and 22 for the amendment. Therefore, the amendment's carried.
Good comedy. It's all down to timing, isn't it? Oh, sorry, you weren't meant to hear that.
Okay. Thank you, Ken.
Welcome back, young Mr. Mack.
Thank you, Councillor Begg.
Okay, we move on from motion 1 to agenda item 10, which is motion 2, and I'm ruling this motion incompetent. And the reason that I'm doing it is because it's not competent, as the council cannot instruct Renfrewshire Leisure to take any action in relation to its workforce.
Provost, can I make an amendment to it?
I'm not accepting any late amendments at this stage. I'm accepting the motion as presented to me, and it's incompetent.
I just want to amend one word.
I'm moving on, Councillor. I've already given my ruling. It's incompetent, and I'm moving on.
You're doing the workers of Renfrewshire Leisure a great disservice.
Well, can I just answer you, Councillor Hood, and this will be my final word on it, and then I'm going to actually finish for a half-hour lunch break. If an issue is so important to you, then it's also important that you get the wording of a motion correct. Now, given the time that the mover and the seconder of this motion have been on this council as councillors, and actually one was a membership of the RL board for quite an extensive period of time, I'm surprised, in fact I'm shocked, that you were not aware that that motion was incompetent and that you're even bringing motions like that to me. It's your responsibility to bring competent motions to this kind of council for consideration. And that's my final word on it. I'm moving on. I'm going to have a half-hour break for lunch, and can I please ask that the recording is stopped until after lunch, and I'll see you all back here at 2:10. Thank you.